Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:08 p.m. Central. Listen to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. And the only rule I forgot to say, rules, I hate rules, but try not to say the F word. And that's the only one. but and my co-hosts break it all the time, but Jeffrey's good, so I don't have to
I
worry.
broke it once.
Oh, yeah.
broke it once.
All right, shh, let's not. Shh.
Sorry.
But anyway, it's fine. But check out Dead Sky Publishing. They have these Weird West splatter Western books that are amazing. A lot of their authors are coming on. We just had Chad Lutsky. There's some others coming on in the future, but it's deadskypublishing.com, and they just put out a weird Western anthology book with Al going back. Remember, he's been on the show. He's great. Love his books. Also, Joe R. Lansdale, who's been on the show, he's in it. There's a lot of cool authors with little, chapters, like I guess Weird West stories. It's an anthology. That's Dead Sky Publishing. And then a book here, My Punk Rock Life, the photography of Marla Watson from Earth Island Books. That's earthislandbooks.com. And it's a lot of photos that she's taken of the Vandals, the Addicts, the Damned, the Misfits, Black Flag, Bad Religion. It goes on and on and on. But the book is My Punk Rock Life, the photography of Marla Watson, and that's earthislandbooks.com. That's really cool. And then real quick, these three, The Dead Take, The A Train, New York is a Hell of a Town, Cassandra Call, and Richard Caudry. Richard writes some great stuff. That's Tor Nightfire, The Dead Take, The A Train, Nestlings, Nat Cassidy. That's Tor Nightfire, a new one that just came out. Nestling, There's No Place Like Home, Nat Cassidy. Then the last one, Zoe is Too Drunk for This Dystopia, Jason Pargan. I believe he just changed his name. It was a different name. And I know he did that book, John Dies at the End, that Don Coscarelli did the movie of. So I don't know if it may be connected to all those, but it's the same author. But Zoe is Too Drunk for Dystopia, St. Martin's Press. So there we go. Great show tonight. We got Jeffrey Shanks here tonight. Jeffrey and Jeffrey, and that's weird, but we're gonna make Jeffrey the name more positive tonight.
Jeff squared.
To make up for the Dahmer thing. So I just, but anyway, we got Stephen Flowers here. Great to have you here, Stephen.
Great to be here. That's great.
I feel like a game show host. Welcome to The Price is Right. Stephen's new book is Gothic Meditations at Midnight. And I'll read the bottom of it if my thing will quit flashing. PDF. Esoteric Commentaries in Classic Horror Literature and Film, 1919, 1975. What was that weird little beep noise I just heard? I don't know. It sounded like I thought someone came in. I think
we lost Stephen for a second, but he came right back.
Okay.
Right. Okay. You're going away and have a buffering symbol and different things are going on.
Well, you're there now and we can hear you okay. If anything happens, just re-click the link and come back. Yeah, but you should be okay. But anyway, Stephen, it's great to have you here. Relate so much to the monster connection that you have in the book, and it's strong. And my story, I don't want to get into it, forever because I bore myself with it. But just to say, when I was younger, I went through testicular cancer and chemo, and it was a weird time for me because hell of a way to start a show with this story. But when I was younger, I had an incident where I was at home and I was self-pleasuring and got caught. And someone told a friend, and then the whole school found out in ninth grade. And hundreds of people made fun of me and made me feel guilty for it, like it was terrible. Teachers would walk up to me and say, let me shake your hand, and they go, oh no, I don't know where your hands have been. And me, the whole time, I felt like I did something horrible. Yeah. And then anyway, the next year I got testicular cancer. So that was at 17. And let's just say an abusive father who's passed now, stress drove him that way in this world, which will do that to many a man. And I escaped into monsters, and at times felt like the monster. Like I felt like I turned into Nosferatu during chemo. When I came back to school, kids called me a Satanist and a vampire because I was pale. I kind of looked like the Powder guy, from that movie Powder.
Well, why not just go on?
And then, yeah, I kind of just embraced that, and it
Yeah.
protected me on many levels. And,
Yeah.
but anyway, then my dad passed away, and I began to have crazy, weird paranormal experiences with multiple witnesses from UFO to beings of light. And that's why we do the show. But that monster element, that's definitely a part. I get it so much. Like, it's definitely, and me and Jeffrey were just talking about this dark side creativity. It's a way for people that are afflicted to tune into that creatively, to, maybe not get on death row, or maybe not become Jeffrey Dahmer.
Well,
So that's what it's about, creativity and all this. But
I
please
make
tell us more about the
connection.
monster.
I make that connection. The idea of folk tales, Grimm's tales, and so
Right.
forth, are have this component wherein those tales were horrifying. Of course, in the original, they were kind of watered down sometimes in translations, but they were pretty gruesome. And the idea is, okay, so your grandmother tells you this story, right? There were no movies in 1830. She's telling you, so it's gruesome, but it's safe. You see, and so that's the way that these monsters were to the monster kids. Kind of a sociological thing. All of the kids of my age, all of our fathers were World War II veterans, and some of them themselves were monsters, not because they have their experiences. I have this kind of thing. My father didn't see action. He was up in Alaska working on the railway lines to get to supplies to Russia and that sort of thing. But anyway, the men who did see action, they either were in the bottle, or they were they were sadists. They were mean and did incredibly horrible things. But they were just PTSD. We just didn't have a name for it. And so a lot of kids were afraid of their fathers, but these films, the actors were of that generation. Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, these were like our old men or whatever, but they were our friends at the same time. And the idea that they too are monsters, they are horrifying, but they're safe, right?
Yeah.
And so I wasn't thinking that as a kid, although a lot of times some of the horrible things that I would see. I recount one about this story called "The Richest Man in Bogota." It was made it was about the country of the blind. H.G. Wells' story about a man who finds these people who have no eyes, and they're blind, and so they discover that he is afflicted with eyeballs. So they tie him to a post and they're going to burn his eyes out to cure him of this affliction. And it's in there. And so I kind of upset me as a little kid. And so the next day I remember acting this out, tie a kid to a post, have something say, I hold here the fire of healing. So we played it out. It was that was part of my instinctive magical practice, right? I exercise that.
That's cool.
Again, not thinking of that way, just kids playing. But I could now, looking back on it, I can see how these kinds of things worked and how
Right.
monster movies themselves work on.
You're using that as magic. You created a ritual out of that.
Yeah.
Right. And made that more real for you. I mean, that's magic.
Yeah. So that's an example, just in mind. That's what the book has. Almost every chapter has a component, a memoir kind of component, like how I personally relate to these different themes.
Right.
And so, and I had a personal relationship in a way as a kid with each one of these things, most of them. sometimes later things, but there's a personal side to almost every chapter.
That's one of the things I really enjoyed, in reading your book. I didn't make it quite all the way through it before the show, and so I had to skim some of the later chapters. But especially going into it, and maybe if you could maybe talk about what it was like to be a monster kid for those who don't know, because so for me, I was into this too, just like Jeffrey, right? But I was a little bit too young to be a true monster kid, right? I caught the residual effects of it in the late '70s, early '80s, right? When the films are still coming on, Famous Monsters of Filmland, the magazine, of course, was still around, but it wasn't like your generation going through this in the '60s with the Aurora models and that whole thing and all those things that tied it together, and Forey Ackerman and all of that.
I have a
Can you
guess.
talk about that a little bit for those who didn't experience that and didn't know what it was? I mean, you've put that in context a little bit coming out of that post World War II period.
Nice.
Look
Oh,
at that, there it is. Oh man,
That's really cool.
what does that mean to be a monster kid? What is the significance of those Aurora models? Let's talk about that because it's so cool.
Like I said, I think there's a line in there where Famous Monsters was our Bible, and these were our gods, our little gods, the little shrines or whatever of the monsters. And so the Monster Kid phenomenon is a strange one in the sense, as far as the profound, I think we were a very frightened generation. Not only these, my father was a very kind and loving man, he didn't, but there were a lot of neighborhood monsters that kids underwent their, abuse from them and things like that. And so it was frightening domestically. And then it was also, of course, we were under threat of intercontinental ballistic missiles. We were convinced we were going to be, it was just going to happen sometime, maybe not today, tomorrow, that we're going to be blasted and we're going to be separated from our parents. Our parents will die and we'll be alone or whatever. These were real fears. And so the monster culture, again, had this effect of being horrors, not getting away from horror. It is horror, but it ritualizes and mythologizes the horror, thus making it fun, and since exercising the demons that are true demons that are in the experience. And so every kid was kind of into it more or less, but there were some of us that were a whole lot more. And you went, and every Saturday there was a new movie, Roger Corman, all those movies from the early '60s. So every Saturday went, stood in line. That theater held 3,000 people. It was packed every Saturday. Not an empty seat in the place. And the screaming and they were these kids. It was all kids, and they were reacting to these films just extremely, interacting with them. The screams, it was bedlam in there sometimes. It was strange that way, and it was made that all the more scary. But so that's we had our literature, we had our films, we had our pilgrimages we made to these theaters, which again were like the kids today when they say, oh, they watch it on at home on the screen, etc. So we were doing the same kind of movie going rituals that our parents, even grandparents, had done. So it was very much of a continuum of culture,
Right.
and in many cases, of course, the generation bridge that Famous Monsters and the Shock package created, when all of these films that really our parents would have seen when they first came out in the early '30s, and then we were seeing them again and loving them again. And so that was a real bridge. But I now see there are no cultural commonalities, but we talked about generation gap in my day. That was when that word was invented, but the gap was not nearly as great, really, as it is now. Yeah. I mean, I hear say, "Oh, this guy's a celebrity," or I see Celebrity Jeopardy, and I say, "I don't know a damn one of these people. Never heard of any of them or ever seen them." And so we had that sort of everybody's Johnny Carson or whatever, bring on Tiny Tim, and everybody saw it. And you watch the Ed Sullivan Show, and there's the Doors and the Rolling Stones and the Animals and all that, and parents and children. There was a commonality there, and that was part of the Monster Kid phenomenon. Also, is that it was a symbolic bringing together of generations. Again, something that makes you feel more safe or more like not lost. And so that was part of it. The early 60s, late 50s, early 60s kind of thing. I cut off my observation of films at around 1975. Now, not that after 75, the films and such are bad. Some of them are super excellent, but the makers are monster kids themselves.
Right.
They're Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and John Carpenter or whatever. They're tapped in. They know what they're doing, right? Whereas the older ones, it's kind of like a Rorschach test. There's an unconscious upwelling of this symbolic material that is coming out on the screen. And they have, of course, with the Hays Code and all that sort of thing, they have to really tone it down. I was just watching the scenes from King Kong that were cut out. And I mean, those were pretty gruesome scenes, and pretty the sexual things with the King Kong sniffing of her. And, it's a sexual, overtly sort of thing. So, I mean, some restrictions, though, improve the art of something like horror films. I make it so that I would say an example, if you had a football game where the only rule was get the ball over the line down there, the goal line. Can I knives, guns? Oh yeah, well, whatever it takes. I mean, then you would have there'd be no Jim Brown. There'd be no great artists, great athletes who have to practice their craft under restrictions. I mean, that's true of art, of athletics, of all these things. And so when the slasher sort of age came in, and you can say, just get gory, get special effects, and then it becomes kind of like a porno in the sense that it moves from one scene of gore to and that's definitely all. And so it's about 75. Like the Exorcist is the last sort of the culmination of it all, and the beginning of something else, as was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's a brilliant film, the original one, in the sense that it was made, and it could have been just be an R-rated thing today. There's nothing explicit there. It's just like old school as far as and they gave it an X originally, and then he just I made some changes there for you boys, but he didn't. He just said he made changes, and they looked at it again. So, it's okay.
I didn't realize that. That's funny.
Nothing there. I mean, there's nothing. But it's so strong, that you're seeing these things, and so that's the art, and that sort of I think has been lost, obviously.
I think that's a really good point, and where you draw that cutoff there in the mid 70s too. Especially with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So retroactively, a lot of people kind of think of it now as sort of a proto slasher, But really, it's not. Really, it's more of the last true monster movie
Right.
in a lot of ways, more
Yeah.
so than a slasher movie in the formula of like Halloween or Friday the 13th, right? They come a few years later.
Absolutely.
That,
Well,
yeah, I don't know. That's interesting, that transit. I mean, it's transitional, right? Like what you're saying
it's
during in that mid-70s period, you know?
and cultural, uh, all triggered by the removal of the Hayes Code.
Right.
That's
I also think it's interesting that you draw that distinction, like, because after that you start getting the creators that are now they're too self-aware, right,
right.
of what they're doing, right? It's something. It's not bad necessarily. It's just something
No,
different,
no,
you
it
know.
would be great.
Um,
But
you
that,
get the same thing in
course,
comic books at that time too, I think,
yeah,
right? What we call like the Bronze Age of comics now is happening at the same time in the 70s with the same kind of phenomenon where you had for the first time the creators that were taking over from the Stan Lees and the Jack Kirbys, or people like the Roy Thomases and the Neil Adamses and stuff that had been comic fans as kids, right? Instead of just
right,
industry professionals, doing their daily grind, you had people that were fans now becoming the professionals,
right.
and it does change things.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
don't know. It's cool.
I mean, I'm not trying to say that, oh, it just all went, it's just terrible now. No, I mean, I've seen some
Right.
recent ones that I thought, this is really great artwork and so forth. They're maximally free. They Anything could be done. You could make one with the same restrictions uh, voluntarily imposed. I'm sure many do.
Right.
So, but
One,
it's
Well, and you had a similar thing with comics too, with the easing up of the Comics Code Authority.
yeah,
Happened at the same
like
time, right?
uh,
I don't know. That's interesting. Those parallels, but yeah,
well,
it's just different.
I was just gonna say real quick, some newer horror movies that are good, but they're hard to watch. And I know the guy David Howard Thornton. He's on my Facebook, and the Terrifier movies 1 and 2. It's like the character in that clown is really iconic, but the scenes are just so freaking gory. It's hard to watch, like people throwing up in the theater and stuff.
uh,
But I've watched them once, and I would probably watch them again. But it's like I'm hesitant. Like, do I need to watch this? Like some of those scenes in there, man. But that
right.
Terrifier clown 1 and 2,
Huh.
they've become big. He's like in
Well,
Freddy territory
people
now.
were really, really frightened, let's say, in the 30s with Dracula and a film such as that. Uh, Although people probably saw more terrible things in their lives in those days than we do, still
Right.
the films would affect people and frighten them much more than you would expect, and that's the reason why they have some of that annoying comic relief. I mean, everybody loves Renfield. I had a great
Right.
little dog that was my minion, and I named him Renfield. He was a giant Chihuahua. He was like 14 pounds. Remember,
Nice.
but we just found him. And anyway, he was my minion. And but Renfield, I love the Renfield character in the original Dracula, but he's there for comic relief. That's what the fly eater thing and all that, or the mystery of the wax museum. It has a lot of this that would otherwise it would be really, really
Right.
good, but that stuff it just kind of was unnecessary for us. But the reason they put it there was to try to alleviate the people would get so frightened and so upset that they will be harmed by these films. So we need comic relief as a form of to alleviate their psyches.
Well, Dracula was definitely what I wanted to get into next. I and Vlad the Impaler and all that. Uh, I collect a lot of figures and stuff of Nosferatu and Vlad the Impaler. There's actually a really cool. I think it's called like the Dracula Tarot by Travis McHenry or Vlad Dracula. But there's a tarot that came out not too long ago. That's like the woodglyph
Mhm.
pictures, and the whole thing is like his story. But love that stuff, and definitely would love to hear you talk about it as much as you want
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I don't know that you read that part of the book, but
Yes.
it's it's a spoiler, right? I mean that Vlad the Impaler had nothing to do with Dracula the book.
Right.
Yeah,
He,
yeah.
yeah, the name was used,
Just the name.
just the name. I mean, they had it was discovered the name Dracula and all that. It just was this sort of came to light when he finished the book and it was going to print, and with the manuscript of it, we just called him Vampire, which was something like that Polidori had done, and so he changed it to Dracula throughout. They changed the name of the character, and of course, made I think that was really important to the success of it, just because of the poetry of that name.
Right.
But that is we have some of the description that the character gives of himself is that this is not Vlad the Impaler, right? It's some he's like different, but that's a separate thing. Is that Vlad the Impaler and the whole mythology? I actually did my when you're in high school in my day. Probably in yours, in a senior in high school, you have to write a major research paper. It's your final thing in English. And I wrote mine on Dracula, and it was like this, as I called it, the truth and the myth and the superstition of Dracula. And I found some books, occult books and so forth. The W.B. Crow's witchcraft book, and a book called the Supernatural, and others that had made this connection with Vlad the Impaler, and before the McNally Florescu book had come out. And so I have that there, but they really did a historian's professional job on the subject. And so Vlad the Impaler is an interesting man in his own right, regardless. And then he's become the later amalgamation of the two has created a new mythology.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting, the mythology. My first inkling of this whole monster book project and bringing mythology together with interpretation really sort of sparked in my mind upon viewing the Dracula of Francis Ford Coppola.
Right.
And I immediately recognized that, hey, this is the mummy mythology, right? This is what the mummy films have, that there's that you have this one character who is immortal through ego consciousness continues, and then there's a beloved who is constantly reincarnating, and he is seeking to reunite with this Ananka, parentheses, and actually it had been that this mythology had been first put together not by Francis Ford Coppola, but by Richard Matheson in writing that Dracula with Jack Palance. And that was originally called Bram Stoker's Dracula. Coppola bought that name and they had to change theirs. And he used the same mythology, but of course, the Jack Palance film was a made for TV movie. and
Right.
where Coppola pulled out all the stops production wise and, made a great piece of artwork. But the film, the mythology is from the Mummy films.
I mean, but that's becoming now, as you said, part of the modern myth of Dracula.
Yeah.
Right. Vlad Tepes, even that reincarnation theme. It appears it's not just in the Coppola film. You see that in Castlevania. Right. There was the Nintendo game. It's now an animated series. You see it in. They did that the new Dracula a few years ago, where they tied him back in with with Vlad Tepes again.
Yeah.
It's now they become inseparable, these concepts. Right?
It's a mythology evolves. Right. We're seeing it in these examples. I mean, this is not different from the way that ancient Greek or Germanic mythology evolved. We think it was, that's set in stone. No, things change. It has to do with does it feel right? Does it feel powerful? Right? Does it work?
Yeah.
You know,
So, yeah.
then it happens. But or it doesn't. It doesn't become part of the story.
Stephen,
Right.
Stephen, I think you would like. I don't know if you've seen it, but that last Voyage of the Demeter, it's pretty good. It's actually good. That Dracula movie that just came out, where he's on the boat and it's like a
Uh-huh.
Nosferatu type situation. But that's a good one that just came out. That's actually good. The
Sure.
last Voyage of the Demeter. It all takes place on the ship, and
Oh,
he's eating them all. So it's
Yeah.
definitely good. Yeah,
So you did like that, huh? I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really wanting to
I
see it.
liked it. I mean, you know, it was good compared to most of the crap that comes out. It was pretty good. Like it was
Right.
old fashioned dudes
I mean, I love the
on the boat
concept.
getting, fighting Dracula.
Right. So
And
you caught
Dracula
that
was
right,
just
Stephen.
pure.
It
Dracula
basically the
was like
whole
a big,
movie
yeah,
is
yeah.
about the voyage, right?
Uh,
Which in the novel,
yeah.
like you talk about in the book, the novel's told in epistolary style, right? It's just
sure.
journals and things like that, right? And so you never get to actually see what happens on the ship on Dracula's voyage to
Right.
London. It just shows up, the ship's empty, everybody's dead, whatever. So that it's basically telling the story of the voyage, right? As a self-contained horror story. Um,
That's
Great
what
so
it
you
idea.
think,
was.
Just like the book, most people's favorite part of the book is the very first part.
right? Yeah,
Parker's encounter with Dracula in the castle and all those things. It has a horrifying scene that I think that somebody's done it, but it couldn't be done for a long time, where the brides are feeding on that baby.
right. That was
That,
in the Coppola version,
yeah,
right?
that's the Coppola.
Yeah, it was in there, right? Uh, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. I know a lot of Dracula fans are not. I've heard a lot of people complain about the Coppola movie, but I love it.
No, it's
Um,
great. I mean, like I said, that was
yeah,
because I just recognized. I just so happened that in that when I saw it, I said, "This is so cross fertilizing the uh, horror mythologies.
right,
It really comes from something deeper and more esoteric. And I don't know how it happened, but somebody who worked on those films, maybe John Balderston or somebody, was learned a bit in things like
right,
Platonic, Neoplatonic philosophy or something, and then came up with it. But the names, I mean, the original names in the 1931 film is our 32 film are not the same, but the 40s series with the use of charis and ananke. And these
right.
words are Greek words, not Egyptian words. And one means gift or grace, charis, and ananke means need or uh, distress. I mean, they're abstract terms.
Right.
So,
Do you have any idea where you think that was coming from? Where the influence was? I mean, there was a lot of Eastern and esoteric thought that was becoming popular in the 20s and 30s, leading into that period in the West. For the first time. Um, where do you think they were getting that from?
well,
The,
that's
the
why.
movie makers.
Well, I'm just somebody like uh, John Balderston must have been somewhat
Yeah.
learned in this. Just be in Greek and something. Ananke has another connection with horror world, or what people think of as a horror thing today. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, that Victor Hugo said that he was inspired to write the book by seeing this Greek word inscribed in the wall, and just in a corner
Huh.
somewhere in Notre Dame. It's which has since disappeared. Just Ananke, just
Interesting.
need sorrow. It's
Right. Huh.
and it's what caused someone to describe this word.
Such an interesting word too, right? In Greek. My Greek's super rusty, but it's need. It's the sorrow that comes with need, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a modern translation might be Jonesin, you
Yeah,
know,
right. Bullshit.
right? The like need that comes like almost from addiction,
Right.
that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, it's very
but
complex. And then that's where these ideas of consciousness static and continuous and cyclical and discontinuous, right?
Right.
And these two types, and then the romance between them. The Mummy in the Boris Karloff version, the original, I mean, is a romance.
Right.
This is undying love that Imhotep has.
Right. It's that need and that desire for something you can't have, right? Or shouldn't be able to have, right?
Yeah,
It's because it's the same with Quasimodo, right? Same kind of idea.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's so much more into these films, I think, than people give them credit. And I love that that's what you're unpacking in this book.
Yeah,
And
and then the
exploring
origin
these
of
themes.
that's not always conscious, right?
Right.
Have I think that we had people who were sometimes very well educated, and then they came across a lot of things in their lives, and then they wrote them, and they just poured out. And their point was just get a script that works, that will work, work, and that's their main thing. But as a job, but this kind of thing comes out unconsciously. That's why I call it like a Rorschach test. Also, the fact that so many people are involved in the making of a film. It's more of a collaborative, collective expression than it is. There's a lot of different things that go into it, and who knows where some idea comes from, gets incorporated, and just the way films are made make it so that it's more of a opportunity for unconscious material to come to the surface and find
Right.
expression.
It seems to me like maybe you're the first chapter you explored, Dracula and the vampire theme. The second, the Mummy, says that's kind of a great segue into this anyway. That the tie between the two with
Mhm.
Coppola's version and the reincarnation thing. Um, it seems like with the Mummy and with the Egyptomania thing that was going on at that time, you saw maybe a more overt interest in esoteric and hermetic ideas
Sure.
with the interest in the newfound Egyptomania that was coming out with the discovery of Tut's tomb in 22 and these kinds of things, right? Because even in things like the Rosicrucians during that period, right, you get all of the Egyptian trappings being added on, and you start seeing Egyptian ideas and aesthetics, and or at least what Westerners perceive as Egyptian ideas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Becoming um, it was very much a part of that. I think that idea of Egypt, ancient Egypt, as this repository of lost wisdom and ancient knowledge and these kinds of things, right?
I
So
do
maybe
very
it's not surprising we see that in the
distinct
Mummy
the
movies
Greeks
more than
and
the others.
others of it. This fascination with Egypt, as Egypt being the place where anytime Greeks would come up with some innovative idea, so I got it from Egypt.
Right.
Right? A lot of times it's just something that's been generated. More likely, these ideas came from Persia than from Egypt, but
Right.
it was very uh, prestigious to say they got it from Egypt. And since nobody could really trace it down very easily, it was innovative, creative people. It's like the Golden Dawn. Oh, we got it in Germany. You know,
Right.
right? To put it off into or Tibet is a secret. Masters from Tibet. That's it.
Right.
Uh, but it's a cover, a prestigious cover for innovative thought.
Yeah. No, that's
And
cool.
been that for a long time. And of course, then when true ability to even read hieroglyphics disappeared around the 400s, then it was like, oh, look at all these writings. We could make up anything. And as far as what they mean, nobody could read any of it.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was literally just in Egypt a couple of weeks ago. I was at the Temple of Philae,
Uh-huh.
and where the last hieroglyphic inscription
Mm-hmm.
is carved on the wall there. And there's something so profound about that. it was just an inscription by one of the last priests there. Phili is, of course, far in the south in Upper Egypt. The country was pretty much Christian by that point for the most part. This was one, temple of Isis that was still holding out,
Yeah.
down there deep in the country with one last family of priests still using the sacred writing, and the last ones that, probably have that knowledge, and carving one last thing on the wall
Mhm.
before it disappeared for centuries. I don't know, something kind of incredibly powerful about that. Um, you know,
And
Hey guys, just real quick, and I don't want to get into this like heavily, but they just said that they tested a weapon of mass destruction in Nevada, and even the Russians are like making statements about it, that they just set off like some kind of nuclear crazy thing.
wait,
Uh,
what?
they're just saying that our government just set off a nuclear blast in Nevada that was so big that the Russians responded, like put out a release or something about it, saying, some crazy military crap. I don't know. It's on it's like, in the news
Wow.
circuit.
hopefully it was intentional.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or it
So
was.
if we evaporate during the show or mutants come out, I just want to say why.
Good Lord.
but,
This is waking up our old anxieties from the
We're
Cold
back
War
to
that we used to hide in the monster movies from, right? I
crazy,
mean,
man.
good Lord.
It is crazy, and that's what I mean, how many monster movies has radiation
Oh yeah.
spawned? One of the movies that scared the crap out of me as a kid, and it's so cheesy and gross, is that Toxic Avenger where they crush that little kid's head with the car or whatever. Like that haunted me forever. Sometime I need to rewatch it to see what happens to me. Like I'll probably shake or something. But they
I mean,
ran over his head or something. I want to see the new Toxic Avenger, but those I'm not really that big into those. I mean, they're okay, but they are definitely gross, like on a lot of levels. Trauma films, but
But that's the '80s, man. You make a great point, though. How much that's past where Steven was working, right? But how many radiation fueled monsters were there in the '80s, right? Right as we're getting to the peak of the Cold War, right, with Reagan bringing it back. Those are
well,
those anxieties that are expressed in our
all the
puppet movies,
big bug movies. I mean, they were
right?
all radiation, and
Radiation,
and Godzilla, of course, the Japanese anxiety about it for obvious
right?
reasons. With
yeah,
and it's so yeah, radiation was a big character in a lot of
These films, it's how we play out our anxieties in a controlled way, like you said, right? Because you could always close the book or walk out of the theater or turn off the TV, right?
Mhm. And you
You
knew
know,
it was you know make believe. You knew it was
right?
a ritual. You knew it was an enactment. It was not really happening.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
except Rosemary, of course, and Rosemary's Baby. She had to discover this is really happening.
Right?
Or that line where she's, "This is not a dream. It's really happening."
Right?
yeah. Well, Stephen, what chapter do you want to talk about that you feel passionate to discuss with us? What's
Oh,
one of the ones that you love? I know they're all great. You love them all. I do
Yeah.
too. But is
I
there a
think
particular?
the Phantom of the Opera was one where I made a lot of interesting discoveries.
Yeah.
Uh, Gaston Leroux, he claimed that this is a report on something that really happened, and these people are real. This happened.
Right.
This is not made up. And I thought, well, of course, that's a typical romantic sort of narrative strategy, to say, oh, this was discovered in this book, or what, to lend this aura of historical believability to it. But then I started to look into some things, some curious things about the story and about some of the things that happened there. And this character, Eric, was, of course, not as opposed to the later films that always had him an example of misunderstood or a genius robbed of his work and acid and thrown in his face and all that kind of stuff, which was not part of the story at all. He was just extraordinarily deformed, ugly man. He was displayed in carnivals as a living dead man or skull or whatever. And so oh, you think, well, what? And then he went to Persia in the story, and that's what that. There's this kind of a detective called the Persian in the book, and he's also in the 1925 film. He's like wearing a fez or something, and he's always looking around and keeping an eye on things. And what happened in the book, this Eric character went to Persia. He designed dungeons and things like that for the Shah of Iran at the time. And if we look back at history and say, well, there was an interesting Shah who did have a dungeon built that was very elaborate. Now, this was Shah Nasir al-Din Shah Qajar was his name. And he ruled for a long time, and he built this Golistan Palace, which is this huge palace still there, and had a dungeon beside it, which was elaborate. And that's where the founder of the Baha'i faith, the founder, they were imprisoned and tortured there. And others, it was just a bad scene. And that prison was then subsequently destroyed after it was just so notorious. It was destroyed back then. And oddly enough, you know what they built on that site? An opera house.
No kidding.
Yeah. And if you look at this Golistan Palace, it was, of course, in Iran, it's very arid in the parts of it, and hot so often, and they had like air conditioning, and they put like a cistern of water underneath this palace so that you could actually go around in boats. It's like a museum now. They don't use it that way, but it had water underneath. And that's exactly the way the Paris Opera House is. It has a drain where water has drained into the bottom intentionally. And that's what that whole thing about. There's a lake down there, and the Phantom is going around in a boat down under there. But here, this building and that building, which he was supposedly in the book instrumental in designing, that's why he could create these secret passages and so forth. That all matches up.
That's cool. Yeah.
There was this thing. There was.
That's really cool.
These historical connections. It's just too much is. But then it's like, where does that come from? I mean, Gaston Leroux says this really happened, but he's not doing this research. He doesn't have this, but this version in the book and in the silent film it is like he escaped from this Shah and went back to the West, but under bad circumstances, right? He wants to really arrest him. Maybe he's not sure. The Shah, he's like, and that's like a secret agent that's following him and helping him. It's kind of an ambiguous relationship, between this Eric and the Shah. None of that is overtly played out, but why is this Iranian, this Persian policeman, there observing everything? It's not really to move the narrative or change it. It's just like, again, speaks to the author's belief that this is real. This really happened. So that was good, I think, interesting. And as a method, as an example of the kind of method that I use, where I look for a historical connection or a philosophical one or whatever, not each chapter is like, well, I got to apply the same method to every one. It's like what they just automatically suggested themselves, like werewolf. I know this from my studies, Germanic studies, Germanic mythology and so forth, that a werewolf is not a curse, it's a superpower, right? That the men in the men's societies, it was part of the adolescent initiation process that they went through a werewolf stage, and transformation into animals, figuratively, probably not actually,
Right.
part of this warrior society, you know, and so the transformation into a wolf, uh, or bear, etc. That's what like the berserker,
Right. That
So,
was,
so
I thought that was really interesting reading that part. Can you talk a little bit about that more? I thought that was very cool.
yeah, well, that's what we've lost for the most part. We've lost the initiatory superpower aspect of werewolfery, and also the sexual component. That there was that we in popular mythology, for example, the wolf whistle, or he is a wolf. This is all, we don't use these
Right.
terms anymore, but back 50 years ago, that's what there was a wolf and sex, and that goes back to and connects with Grimm and the Little Red Riding Hood.
Right.
That this is a story about sexuality of a girl getting her first period. Uh, she is pursued. She's starting to become a woman. A male aggressor is after her, kind of, and consumes her. And then a better man comes along and splits the wolf open. There's a lot of blood, and she and the grandmother emerge from the wolf, and she's a woman now.
Right.
So these are mostly stories. That's why the girls are the protagonists in so many of these fairy tales, because they were often instructional tales to girls, about being hardworking, or warning them about this or that. But they're very but this goes deeper. If you look at Germanic mythology, the Ragnarok, at the end of, as described at the end of time, when
Right.
the god Odin is swallowed by a wolf.
By Fenrir. Right.
Right, and his son Vidar avenges him immediately. How? By ripping the wolf open.
Right.
Now, to me, interpret that actually this is telling you, bringing Little Red Riding Hood into it. Why does he have to rip the wolf?
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
he's releasing a transformed Odin back into the world.
Cool.
So, but that's what's going on there. So a lot of these old myths, they only tell a little portion of the story to us. I mean, so much of it is just understood to the contemporary world to which it belongs.
Let me ask you this. This is anthropologist to me, like wanting to unpack that a little bit because it's absolutely fascinating, right? This idea of the tearing of the wolf, right? And seeing this as in both cases, both stories we're talking about here, they are in a sense initiatory, as you said, right? But it's
Transformation.
transformative, right? It's transformative in a way, though. Do you think it's the idea is you got to be consumed by the animal in us, right? You've got to become the animal, but then you have to then find a way to transcend that to become a true man or woman, as the case is that what they're getting at?
We have to have a hero or a benefactor to liberate us. See,
Right.
that's like in the case of Odin, we get that really a lot of details about things that kind of lead up to. It's like, see what I'm leading up, see all this stuff. Well, he ripped him open. Is that just in the book or just in the poem and not a big deal? No, there's
Yeah.
folklore.
It's too specific to not matter.
You say Vizar's, there's leather that a shoemaker will throw away or burn. I said, what is that for? So, well, that is leather that is going to be on the heel of Vidar. That's all going to be collected. He has to have a big, thick one in order to do this task of he's going to put the heel down on the lower jaw and rip up. So it's more than just a story. There's folklore, and it's deeper and it's more pervasive than that. And so, but you have to have this. And he is engendered, Vidar, is engendered by Odin specifically for this one thing, to avenge me. And of course, that was a big part of going back to that Robert E. Howard, this idea of reincarnation, that you have to, that liberates your soul to come back into the clan. But the father, the first duty of a son, if his father is killed, it's the Hamlet story,
Right.
is to avenge his father's death.
It's
not just it's just a thing to do, like we're a bunch of gangsters or something. No, it's like we've got to get his luck back, his soul back into our clan, because a murder or a killing by another group steals it, captures it, takes it away from us. We got to get it back, and this is how you do it.
And that story is one of the oldest, right? It's Osiris, Set, and Horus. That Hamlet story, right?
Yeah.
The murder of the father and the son that has to avenge them, right? And then bring him back. It's been
Hamlet,
there forever.
Of course, I watched that recent that film of the Northman, and it was okay, but I think he strayed too much from the Hamlet
right.
story in the sense he didn't have to. It is a Norse saga,
right?
Originally,
right.
and it was only occurred in a Latin version, but the dilemma there, the power of that story, is that it's okay. Your father's been killed. You must avenge him, but my mother is now married to him, so he is also legally like my stepfather.
Right.
And that's that moral dilemma, to be or not to be. That's what he's caught in this horns of that dilemma, morally or ethically. Is like he's a family member. It's not like the guy from another tribe that I need to avenge my father. So it's like still in the family, but so I get it's a real barbarian moral,
Yeah, that guy's doing Nosferatu next, which I hope it's good. That's a hard one. But
I've heard he's been going at that for a long time.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And one of the big things about monsters is when the monster, he may do a few bad things, but usually the asshats that want to kill the monster are worse than the monster. I know that's in Frankenstein, but is there some other ones with that kind of motive? What are some things with that kind of situation where the humans are really the monsters? And they're always trying to kill the monster, but compared to that monster, they're probably worse than the monster. Like Frankenstein's a good example for sure of that one.
Right. There's always ambiguity about the monster's character or whatever, that he was either he became this thing through no fault of his own. That's what they turned like the werewolf story, into. And that's very interesting. That Kurt Siodmak, the Siodmak brothers, the release date, he saw this in his own life as a illustration of Nazism, of the beast in man, right?
Right.
These, it's best as kind of a weird synchronicity that the release date of the Wolfman and the day that Hitler signed the papers to initiate the extermination of the Jews was signed on that same day.
Wow.
But Siodmak did see this as a illustration of this bestial nature that is unleashed. But see, it's ambiguous in the sense that he is a German, a Jewish German, but still a German, sees that this whole Nazi thing is an aberration. It's a sickness. It's a curse. It's not like just saying, oh, Larry Talbot is an evil man, but he's afflicted with an evil curse. Doesn't mean that he's not dangerous and won't kill you if he gets the chance. But when he's in that mode, but that's just a synchronicity, that thing with the the
Yeah,
sign.
it's a horrible synchronicity was what I was thinking when you told me that. When you
Uh,
mentioned that, that's
it would perfectly illustrate what he was thinking. That yep, this is what I'm talking. They,
yeah,
we wouldn't even have known that until later when
no,
that happened. It wasn't like the news. And the news tonight, Hitler is just signed. That wasn't the way
right,
it was. But so that's all of them. Most of all of them are sympathetic. The Phantom, so forth. I mean, everybody say, well, he's just so he's cursed by his deformity. He is a genius. But he can't find love, because of his
right.
deformity. Uh,
Even Imhotep, right? It's the same kind of idea, right? I mean, he's motivated by something we can all appreciate, right? Love, right?
and they're almost none of the monsters are truly of our classic world, are
Right,
truly just evil. I mean, I guess Dracula could be, in the sense that if we look at the uh, book, right, it's not like,
right,
oh, Dracula was bitten, no. He was just so deeply into satanic
right,
right, so forth, at the Sholomance, that he became this thing almost, by willfully so. And
right.
so,
Um, just to get back to the werewolves for a minute, because that's interesting. We kind of jumped from that's their sort of primal folklore mythological initiatory aspect, right, to the more modern version there with where you're looking at this as a sickness and with the idea that it's something that can be cured. What's always fascinated me, and you touched on this a little bit, is the medieval concept of the werewolf, right? With like Peter Stubbe and some of those kind of ideas, and the beast, in France and these kinds of things.
uh,
Um, how did we get there? How did we get there from this idea of this being sort of a the transformation, like, and then transcending the beast and man as this initiatory ritual? Um, how did we get there to the
well,
modern concept of the werewolf?
I think that I got a misbehaving dog. Uh, that
It's okay.
the uh, the uh, the truth or the original idea is just so difficult for modern people to relate to.
Hmm.
You have to get into this whole initiatory thing. Get a superpower. What am I going to use this for? I mean, nowadays people, I think, could do like what is this? The Avengers or the X-Men and things like that. We're
Right,
more attuned to that kind of thing. But I think that for a long time, with Christian, because it's a part of a pagan religion, werewolvery.
right,
So it was hard to relate to it as a curse, like when I do bad things because it's a curse, it's a disease, it's this, that, that all is very intelligible to people. But the other is you have to delve into or understand a culture which is rather uh, foreign or alien to people in a Christian world. Again, people are
right,
starting to wake up to these things that it's not that, I mean, it is a positive or a good thing, but we'll see a war. We have these things now, we're confronted with terrible situations. And the war is, as Sherman says, hell. And these people who fight in war are turn into demons, bloodthirsty demons. Now, our ancient ancestors realized that, and they believe, whether Celtic, Germanic, whatever, that all killing is bad, you know, not because there's a tablet that says thou shalt not kill, but just because it's polluting. And in that kind of fighting, it really is. I mean, usually guys come out if they survive, drenched in blood and brain splat all over them, and so forth. And so they need to, after battle, be reintegrated through ritual into normal human family life. But there are rituals for that. The the god hero Cthulhu, Celtic, or he got he would get this heat, he'd become like battle frenzy. And then when he would come back after this fight, they would dunk him into vats of water, one, he got heated that one up, as boiling, put him in another one, 3 of them, and he will be cooled down. But the whole thing, this idea is, just like these guys coming, these monsters I'm talking about coming back from World War II or from Vietnam.
He's up to something.
Huh?
They're saying he's up to something, the dog behind you.
Oh,
He's making sure it's nothing important. But one thing I was going to say just real quick about werewolves, the creepiest thing about them is there's a lot of paranormal stuff about people seeing these things that's kind of, I mean, I don't know if they're actually seeing what it is, but there's some lucrative stuff like Linda Godfrey. Like there was some town, I forget where it is, where the sheriff got so many calls about them seeing like a wolf humanoid that he started to keep all the stories. And then there was just a documentary from Small Town Monsters called The Dogman Triangle that's in Texas, and it's on Tubi. But supposedly there's an area where people have seen the same humanoids, werewolf, basically, dog man, in a Texas area in 3 different encounters, and they have the witnesses, and it's like just these down there farmers that said they saw like 12 of them, and they seem, I mean, you don't know unless you're there, but they seem dead serious and freaked out that they saw these things. So there's something to it. I mean,
well,
there's something to it.
There's a lot of guys, nowadays. I know some of them, who are into the werewolf cult. You know what I mean? The Wolves of Vinland, for example, is a group, and they're taking this stuff pretty seriously. But
that's interesting. The Dracula or the vampire cults have been around for a while. I didn't realize it was werewolf ones.
Yeah, nowadays, but they're into the kind of thing like kind of like men's groups, right? Where they
There's Denny Sargent, werewolf magic. They all get out in the woods and howl and stuff. I've had them on the show.
So
isn't that kind of a return to what you were talking about, though?
I am part of that. So I'm not part of the werewolf thing per se.
Right.
But like I said in the book, I said I was a werewolf for a while, but I'm better now. And the more the sexual kind of thing, but and that's a Werewolf of Paris is like a really story, or he really gets into it that it makes it so the sexual component is there, the blood, the lust is there, and all of that sort of thing. And I was just rewatching. I was a teenage werewolf. And I said, that's one of the only examples. There's a scene in there. It's one of the only examples that I know of in, older films.
Right.
Where there's a connection between sexual feelings and turning into the werewolf. Now, the cat people, that's what that's all about. Right. But as far as werewolves, he's, sees this girl, like on a gym apparatus, kind of half undressed and so forth, and looks at her and, turns into the werewolf.
Right.
Kind of says, obviously he's having sexual feelings and it triggered him.
Right.
Typical real old stories, that there's a sexual component to it.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, right? It's that bringing out that primal, the animal instinct, right? The primal man that's in there. And I think you start to get in some of the later movies by the 80s with the Howling movies. They bring back the sexuality aspect to it.
Yeah.
Was it Howling 2 with that one great scene with what's her name? Did I say that out loud?
I've seen them. I saw the first one not too long ago. It's been a while though. I think there's like
an orgy. I haven't seen that since I was a kid, but that may have initiated a transformative ritual for me in my adolescence as well. Watching that movie, I think.
Wolfen.
Exactly. Wolfen, great movie. Yeah.
So they were. That's what I'm saying. That there's the making it come more conscious, all these things made for some good films and good
Right.
ideas and so forth. But, these are guys who studied a little and researched, and it's like when I was Star Wars. I remember when it first came out, I was just, okay, this is a new movie. It might be interesting, but
Right.
it was like that press conference that Lucas and Spielberg had, and they were like holding Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces in their hand.
Right.
You
and they were self-consciously
yes.
following, the path of a hero with their film, right? Which makes it a little different than the stories that do that naturally, I think.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
not bad, but it's just different. You
it's
can't
different.
go, I'm going to, like my Gothic meditations at midnight are attempts to draw out some hidden interpretation. But in this case, you just got to research into what we in literary studies call positivism. That is
Right.
study the person's reading and what he studied and what he believed, the author, and you discover then what made him tick. And that's how you interpret the thing, as opposed to, we don't know. He's like often, inspired by things. And I've known a lot of people. I knew a filmmaker who's died a few years ago named William Whitliff. And he made he did the film version of the Lonesome Dove. So he's a lot of Westerns. But when I was working, I was packing books for him, 1978, 79. And he was a publisher, but he got into filmmaking. And he made a couple of films at that time that were, one is called Raggedy Man, and another one, Barbarossa, with Willie Nelson.
Right.
He knew I was into mythology, so he gave me the scripts of these films and said, do a mythic analysis, because this guy, he read like Seth's material or all kinds of new age kind of things, and constantly consulted psychics his whole life, and he was into things like that, but not studying about mythology. This all just came up from who knows where. And so I analyzed them, and these things were just full of mythological content that he knew nothing of. He didn't consciously put any of it in there. Just like Raggedy Man, he's like, his father has been lost. He doesn't know this. The kids see this Raggedy Man. He's kind of like a guy who has a lawnmower that goes around the neighborhood. He's all messed up. He's got one eye, and so forth and so on. And this guy comes at the hour of their need, when the mother and the kids are being attacked by hoodlums or thugs. He comes and saves them. But it turns out to be his own father, the kid's father, who had been off in the war and was disfigured, in the war. But he had one eye, the Odin thing, the father, the lost father, this, that, and the other. And so it was all there, but it was really just a kid's fantasy. His father did run away, not in the war. And he and his brother would always fantasize, I bet Daddy's around here somewhere looking over us. And that was just a little kid's thing. And he made it into a film, but had all this mythic material there. Barbarossa, similar kind of stuff. But these are examples where a person, an artist, is inspired by something beyond their research.
Right.
From somewhere else. And that's what I see with the Robert E. Howard thing, too, that he's coming up with things that were beyond his research. It was more.
Right. For those who don't know, Robert E. Howard is the creator of Conan the Barbarian, is what most people know him for. Call Solomon Kane. But for listeners that may not know who that is.
And he was friends with Lovecraft and a correspondent, and wrote Lovecraft, Cthulhu mythos stories also.
Right.
But,
and listen, heavily influenced by the films that you're talking about here today, right? Lovecraft, Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, all of these pulp writers they were writing in the 1920s and 30s, right? In the same time, a lot of these Universal films are about to come out, and they were all playing with the same ideas at that time, and they were influenced by them. They were seeing the films. So I think it's relevant to talk about that. You have a chapter on Lovecraft,
Yeah, yeah,
in this book.
yeah. But he's a lot of movies were made. His name wasn't box office magic as much as Poe was, where they would, even they'd take a Lovecraft story, Charles Dexter Ward, and say Edgar Allan Poe's The Haunted Palace. It's really
Right.
a Lovecraft story,
Right.
with with a one line or half line from a Poe poem, where they could say it's Poe.
Right.
It was magic, box office magic. You Yeah, Haunted Palace was pretty scary to me as a kid. Lovecraft's films, Die Monster Die, Haunted Palace. I remember them having. Even I didn't know who Lovecraft was when I saw them. But as a kid in the theater there, like I was describing earlier, but there was something extra creepy about them that the mythos comes through, uh, despite any effort to make it just something normal. Like, what is that haunted palace? I mean, that is, you don't really get it. He's trying to breed this monster with these women, right?
Right.
And then so forth. Or like in Murders in the Rue Morgue, which has to do with the with the Poe story, but
Right.
has to do with mixing ape and human blood
Right.
or genetics with,
Which is a theme that both Howard and Lovecraft both played with, right? This sort of evolutionary anxiety
right.
that you had it during that time, right?
Yeah, I have quite a bit, that with the Ed Wood, his Bride and the Beast. That's one of the most,
Right.
great examples of that, where the woman is like somehow a reincarnation of an ape, and it's like really that's of course Ed Wood is a much misunderstood
Yeah.
person. Like people, I make a big deal out of it. That Michael Medved saying, "Plan 9 from Outer Space is the worst film of all time." No, it is not the worst film of all time. There are thousands of ones that are worse, that have no message, no meaning.
Right.
You may have built $1 million special effects, but you don't have an idea. You don't have a
Right.
story. And he does. So
Yes.
it
He
needs
just didn't have the budget to,
it needs to
carry
be
it out.
remade. I think that Plan 9 from Outer Space should be remade the way
Yeah.
he would have done it if he could have.
Mm.
So I mean, that whole thing was like that. There's another theme I've developed in the book to some extent. It's just this whole thing. We've touched on it already several times. This idea of the outsider.
Right.
The monster and the monster kid they are outsiders. They just want to. Colin Wilson's book, The Outsiders,
Yeah.
uh, uh, studies this as a phenomenon. But outsiders want to cease to be outsiders, but they have a process to develop in order to become something. And monsters are like that. Of course, Lovecraft's story, The Outsider,
Right.
has us where the guy is a resurrected corpse. He's coming, and just the punchline is he looks in the mirror and sees this awful monster.
Right. I mean, that kind of ties in with a lot of what you were saying earlier, right? I mean, that kind of hits it on the nose. This idea of the viewer, the reader, whatever, also relating with the monster, the other here. We haven't talked much about Frankenstein, but I feel like Frankenstein. This is a segue for that, right?
Yeah, that's incredibly important book, film. Most people, it's never been made as a film directly from the book with the same message. It's like a story that is really current in the sense that it's the irresponsible use of science.
Right.
It's a romantic critique of modern life or modern science, that we're going to create
Right.
something that's going to destroy us because we do not have the wisdom to manage these creations of whatever they are, whether it's a whatever technology you can imagine. I mean, in 1818, you're thinking, what? Nothing has happened. They got nothing. But that in their world, it was like things were happening fast in
They
their
were.
way of thinking or their interpretation or feeling about it. And so it's the irresponsible scientist who creates something he can't control. And the fact that the creation becomes more civilized than the creator is just really profound.
Let me ask you a loaded question along those lines, and I know where you go about this in your book, but I got to ask you. So, is Frankenstein horror or science fiction?
Is it horror or science fiction? Well, I would say it's
Or both?
primarily science fiction.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, as far as the real, uh, message of it, the idea that it is a critique of science,
Right.
right, and a scientific creation that in this case it's a entity that is horrific, but again, the individual, the monster becomes a very uh, good human. I mean, as far as he may not be human fully or whatever, but he is uh, driven by good things. He wants to learn to read and all that sort of thing. All these kind of odd, far fetched ways in which the monster learns how to read, and all of that sort of thing. But it's just pure romanticism. But that's what it is, a romantic with a big R, romantic critique of uh, the Enlightenment and the idea of science is going to save us and that sort of thing. But it's about science in every way. It has a horrific component to it because of the nature of the science. But she'd written something about a contraption, mechanical contraption, rather than something that's made from corpses. Then it would be pure. I mean, it wouldn't be that much of a question. But
right.
But that's real typical of the romantic. Also, they look at science or into as a biological science fascinates them more than mechanical physics, which was more of the bailiwick of the Enlightenment and the classicist kind of thinking.
A lot of people don't realize she also wrote one of the first apocalyptic novels.
Yeah, The Last Man.
The Last Man. A lot of people forget that because, quite frankly, it's not nearly as good as Frankenstein. But people. I mean, I think we underestimate just how innovative Mary Shelley was, and how ahead of her time.
Yeah, it's really tremendous idea and so forth. I know that there's some controversy over her. That Shelley, Percy Shelley, edited the book quite heavily, apparently.
Yes.
To some extent, there's a computer program, that can analyze writing and identify. Well, this is John Clancy or whatever wrote this, like that. And so they put it through that and said, it doesn't look like her other writing.
Interesting. I didn't realize stylometrics is the term used for that. I didn't realize they had done that with Frankenstein. With Frankenstein or with The Last Man?
With Frankenstein.
Really? Interesting.
I didn't know that. But what I think is it's clear that it's her work. People don't realize, literary, students realize it or learn about it, that a lot of the great authors, whether it's whoever, oftentimes there's an editor behind them, that there's somebody they worked with steadily and constantly that learned about, how they wrote. But if they didn't have them, their writing would not be as nearly as good as it is. The editors are very important. That's what I've worked with people in the book world, especially English people are bad on this, where you say, okay, I'm editing your book, and this is like, you need to change this, or this is not clear, or whatever. They go, what? This is like, for real, like they treat all their writing like a holy writ somehow. Right. But I think, as a writer, if I get an editor who's, okay, we're going to do this, I say, look, it's going to be my name on the book. If you make me look smarter than I am, have at it.
Right? Exactly.
Much,
Nope, I do. I've been fortunate to have a couple of good editors that made me sound a lot smarter than I really am. I love it.
But like I'm saying, it's you're not alone. I mean, I think there's some great writers, maybe F. Scott Fitzgerald or something. I remember the thing with Hunter S. Thompson. So, he learned to write. Well, one of his exercises that he typed out The Great Gatsby.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because, it's like artists where they say, I'm going to become a great artist. So I'm going to copy masterworks. Right? That's typical in art.
Right.
They try to imitate Leonardo da Vinci or whatever they're doing.
Sure. Right.
And in this case, I mean, you can write and say, if you copy out great writing, then your fingers, your whole everything just kind of absorbs that, the syntax and everything. But learning how to write that way. But that was an exercise he did.
So he transcribed it. I had to do that with John Keel before for a publisher. I had to read a lot of articles of John Keel, so I had to go over all his words. It's kind of weird for sure. It felt weird.
Which of his books did you do? Because I love John Keel. I'm a big John Keel.
It was a lot of articles. Andy Colvin, the Mothman photographer, who I've done some books with. A lot of it's just transcripts of these shows and interviews. There's a Praise for the Hairy Man, The Secret Life of Bigfoot. But he has a lot of John Keel books. If you look up Andrew Colvin or Andy Colvin I think it's Andrew Colvin, the Mothman photographer, it's on Amazon. All those books will come up that he reissue with John Keel. And a lot of them is obscure John Keel stuff, like articles from different things. And who's Gray Barker? I had to do a lot of that too.
Yeah, right.
So those, I hate transcripting. I had to listen to interviews for that Bigfoot book and type it out while you listen, and I actually hit a door and hurt my hand, which that's something I don't normally go around hitting stuff, but that transcripting sucks. It sucks.
Trey Barker was an interesting figure. Yeah. He's the guy that coined the term Men in Black.
Yeah.
One of his books in the 50s.
Apparently with the Russian test, the test that went off in Nevada, Russia just revoked that global nuke test ban, and hours after we decided to do it, I guess, in retaliation. This is just getting worse and worse every day. It's like Hezbollah firing on Israel,
I thought we left
Iran shock
80s.
troopers.
What's happening?
Shit's breaking loose.
It's going to be we're going to have the amazing colossal man now out there.
Right?
Yeah. Hopefully, if only that would be that cool. But one thing I wanted to talk about, I know you mentioned Hammer a good bit, and a Plague of the Zombies. I love all that stuff. I have got to watch some Hammer during October for my Halloween binging for sure. But what's some of those that you grew up with or remember?
Well, that was my father. He just on a lark, he was just going to say, "Okay, I'm just kind of a rite of passage or that unintentional. I'm going to take a kid to see scary movies, So he took me to, and he later read it, because he said, "Oh, these monsters, this is ridiculous," But it was a double feature, Brides of Dracula and The Leech Woman. And so Brides of Dracula was one of my first, films I saw there in the theater. And those Hammer films, they have such a rich feeling,
Good.
And they, when you see them in the theater, that kind of the coldness of the theater, they're very air conditioned and the plush kind of carpets, as well as with the gum on the floor. But it was like that whole Hammer aesthetic and the theater kind of just amalgamated, in your mind and your sensory, that it was very much a part of that. But my father, he would say, okay, he would see those scary parts coming up. So then he would say, I'll be back in a minute. He'd go to the back of the theater and watch me, how I was reacting, looking down between the seats or whatever. I was like 6, 7 years old. And
Right.
so, but the Hammer films, they're good, but there's something about them that is not as good as the Universal film. They're luxurious and all of that, but I think a lot of it, like, why did Christopher Lee, portray Dracula in that way? I mean, he, this kind of animalistic Dracula, when he was perfectly capable of, to hear him tell it was like, oh, I just didn't, want to make. It wasn't close enough to the literature to be respectable, so he kind of made him into almost like a werewolf. It's an animal, but he's like dressed in, in evening wear. So it's like, but
because you're right, he could have done the other Dracula so well, Yeah, it's such a good point.
Curse of the Werewolf was one of my favorites as a kid. I have a story in there about kind of similar thing. I was seeing it in the theater. I was going, we were going to visit my mother, and it was family friends. And my mother says, "Don't tell the kids that we're going to the movies because they will want to come." And their father just lets them go to Disney movies, and so we can't, do that. But of course, I, being a kid, spilled the beans. And so we're going to go to the movies. So they went to the movie, but they'd never seen these other kids things like that. So they were freaking out, And this one kid, my friend, is about my age. He would hide, hide his eyes, not watch. And then at a certain moment, he did watch it, and he hollered out in the theater, "I had the guts to watch it that time, Aunt Betty." That's my mother. And God, the whole theater started laughing. But so kids, in movies like this, they're profoundly. It wasn't like just sitting there watching it in your living room on a DVD or whatever. It was the theater experience is missing for us now so much, and that's also something that's been lost. That was important. Even the drive-in theater, they'd have 6. You go see 6 horror movies in a night, all night long, and these kind of things, and just experiences. That's kind of that William Castle chapter where the theater going, he took it to the next level and made things happen for the person, for the viewer, for the audience, that were to the next level, shocking them in the seats and things like that.
Right.
Idle 13 Ghosts was something my father took me to see. Had the view, thing, the view, both ghost view, that sort of thing. And it was just something special, William Castle. And I love William Castle movies a whole lot. Just for that. But it's weird, though. He was very obsessed with money. If you see that every story, every film has something to do with money. With money being swindled, lost, whatever. Like Mr. Sardonicus, right? There's a lottery ticket that is in this guy's father's vest pocket when he dies. And so the son goes and digs him up to get it, but sees his father's rotting corpse and everything. It suffers from facial paralysis from the trauma, But he's going for that lottery ticket. It's some kind of money, or a house on Haunted Hill with the millionaire, made to spend the night here and get this money. And, there's every one of them. Kind of interesting.
I need to get into William Castle more. I bought a collection.
Yeah.
I've always heard of him, but I don't know if I've ever seen him. The Haunting of Hill House. The one you mentioned, the Haunted. Oh, that's him too. William.
Hill.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
I'll have to get into those for my Oktoberfest.
the Tingler is
The Tingler was one. That's the one where they shocked everybody, right? With the seats.
and it was in black and white, but in a certain moment when blood was there, it was in color. I mean, the red was on the screen,
Right.
so that it's kind of, I think most versions of it on TV are in color or colorized, or they don't do that necessarily,
Right.
but. Like a lot of these old films, the Phantom of the Opera, when it's seen originally of at the better, more mainstream theaters, had a lot of color. They had to hand tint every frame, but the inside,
Right.
or the German films, the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, etc. They had color. I mean, they were like this green. They would be kind of green and black, white. All these kind of colors were typical of how they actually were experienced originally, not just black and white.
There's a it's only a couple of minutes long, but there's probably the earliest film adaptation of She by
Uh-huh.
H. Rider Haggard
Uh-huh.
is 18. I think it's 1899, and it's they only do the sequence where she's in the pillar of flame,
Uh-huh.
and it's done with special effects. It was the same kind of special effects they were doing on the stage play at the time, where they basically used like red cloth and they were like making it billow so it looked like flames and she's in it or whatever. And it's hand tinted and it's in so it's sort of color, right? It's really more like duotone or maybe three tones to it, right? But it's incredible to see that. Think about that. They literally went in there and hand tinted every single cell,
Mm-hmm.
to create that effect. 1899, it's amazing they were doing that early.
She is another example of the immortal and the reincarnation. Right? She's her
Yes,
lover, supposedly, a reincarnated person
right.
that she finds, and she's been immortally living all these years. So,
Right. You talk about it in your mummy chapter,
uh-huh.
as a precursor to that idea. For me, I love it. I love she. In some ways, it's the first fantastic archaeological story.
Yeah.
Right? I
Uh-huh.
mean, King Solomon Mines predates it, right? So kind of that's there, but with she, literally the MacGuffin is a potsherd.
Uh-huh.
It just doesn't get any more archaeological than that, right? This is the beginning of that whole, where we get, Raiders of the Lost Ark from this, right? This whole idea, the fantastic archaeology story.
Yeah.
So just for me personally, I have a big soft spot in my heart for She. I love it. I've
Yeah.
collected almost every edition of that I can get. I've got, I got the first edition. I've got I have a 1894 poster from one of the stage play versions of it that may be the only one in existence. So yeah, I don't know what it is. Maybe I'm Haggard reincarnated. I don't know, but I have an obsession for She for whatever reason for that story. One incredibly popular story, right? That's was done. Miriam Cooper did a version. Hammer did a version with Ursula Andress. But it's almost forgotten today.
Yeah.
At one time, this was an incredibly popular story. It was as popular as Dracula or Frankenstein or some of these others we've been talking about. But yeah,
She
it's
who
kind of
must
lost
be
now.
obeyed. She who must be obeyed.
She who must be obeyed, Ayesha. You know, she's the prototype for Law of Opar. From Burroughs and the Tarzan stories. Howard has a version of Rocky Vasha, this like immortal vampire, one of the Conan stories, so she's an archetype as well, right?
Mhm.
That sort of immortal, lost goddess, type figure.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
you know.
So,
Well, one thing we didn't talk about the zombies. You have a zombie
zombies.
chapter.
I was
We got 8 minutes, so
Do it fast.
fast zombies. No, that's
Fast.
but yeah, that was a real transformation of zombies from sugarcane slaves to out of control consumers, literally
Right.
of your brain. But I think it's that's Richard Matheson, who's such a tremendous writer, being so important to the whole genre as far as a creative person. Whereas I Am Legend, was essentially, but when he wrote about, he called them vampires. They were vampires
Right.
in his story. And of course, that was a popular, made two versions of it right together, pretty close together, with one with Vincent Price and one with Charlton Heston, you know. And but that's the thing that transformed the genre into something other than Afro-Caribbean folklore into
Right.
the kind of killer, consumers, which is
Talk about that difference a little bit, because I think most modern people only know the post Romero, post Matheson style of zombie, right? I did
right.
a collection of zombie stories from pulp magazines, and so I'm familiar with the earlier Haiti Voodoo version. Talk
Sure.
about the difference, right? Because it's very different, right?
Well, that one is like we want slave labor, right? But it's also used by the voodoo priests as a form of punishment, for people who cross them or do whatever. They're zombified, and that Serpent in the Rainbow story, until it gets into that, how it's supposedly done with psychologically and pharmacologically and so forth. But yeah, it's part of a folklore or magic and religion of Afro-Caribbean people, especially in Haiti,
Right.
and it had nothing to do with any of that. And again, like I don't know who started. I think it's critics or people writing about these things who started calling Matheson and Romero and those things as zombies. Right? It's more outside, and then it just took off. It just stuck, you know.
Right.
But
Yeah, Night of the Living Dead is like the only movie I think that's ever really scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Yeah.
Like I was checking under beds and crap
Right.
after that one. I recently watched Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, and they're just so good. There's something about them that's just
They're good.
powerful. Like you feel weird afterwards for days after watching them. But yeah, I love it. And they just did a Creep Show episode. That's a good show. I know there's the Creep Show movies, but they have a series of it now on Shudder, and it's on season 4. And they're just like two little stories, like Tales from the Crypt. But they did a Ramiro episode where they found an old comic and some 3D glasses, and the zombies came out and all this crap happened. But they're fun to watch. Creep Show. I've always loved
Cool.
those Creep Show movies. Meteor shit, you know. But
So it was Stephen King doing EC on EC Comics on the screen. How
yeah,
can you not
yeah.
love that?
Well, we got
oh,
4 minutes.
okay,
Well, yeah, give us some links and everything. Yeah.
I'm happy. The book we're talking about Gothic Meditations at Midnight, is now, just as of yesterday, available on Amazon. So anybody can go and get it there now. It was long in the making, but it's finally there. And do you put up links on your website or anything?
Yeah, just give us the link and I'll say it. I'm going to say it more in some more shows as well for sure, and
Okay.
keep the
Well,
word
I have
out.
a website where you can get all of my books, and that's seekthemysteries.com.
Seekthemysteries.com.
Yeah,
Very cool.
you can get it, and all just and that's that. And of course, I have books. Some of my more recent books with the inner traditions. Here's one. The Occult in National Socialism. Oh, where is it?
Yeah, there we
There we go.
yeah,
Nazi
that's a good one.
occultism. That
Nazi.
could be a whole episode on Nazi occult stuff.
And that's deep.
Yep.
And this, I think, most people have read it, say this is, goes beyond it, because I have a whole annotated bibliography of all the books that are written on that subject and kind of what's wrong with them,
Yeah.
and I have this kind of method of looking at it that goes, there's a mythical thing, there's a scientific thing, and there's different most people just go into one thing. So, oh, like Guido von List is just it's all about that or whatever. They just get on a hobby horse and say that, or the Spear of Destiny, which is a work of fiction,
Right.
That was sworn to in court that it was a work of fiction. And so anyway, this book I'm really proud of. It worked a long many years on that, just like the Gothic Meditations at Midnight is a book that was long, in the making. That's one of the things. Some of my books I write fairly quickly because I can just fairly simple, but some things have taken decades to research. And
definitely, that's a deep subject. All that Nazi stuff. I've had Peter
Levindo.
Yeah,
sure.
I've had Peter Levindo on. I know that stuff. Man, just thinking about it, it's just a lot.
But you did.
Yeah, a long time ago. But what's weird about him is he has a connection with that Simon paperback, which he might have been part of that collective. There's definitely we got into that, and he's kind of.
You don't want to talk about that.
Tips around it. So he also said Mabus was a thought form that I made my own that drains me, or something weird about me playing around with that Mabus name. I was on a lot of drugs when I did that. But anyway,
I assume that
now I liken it to Ash and the Necronomicon. Yeah. We have a guy that comes on, I swear, Eric Grimsrud, he has a thing breaking down Trump with the Mabus using the Drump acronym or whatever. He breaks it down and it's creepy. Like there's some creepy crap that Trumplegooch might be Mabus. but anyway, first off, Stephen, this is the greatest Halloween show ever. Like wonderful, the perfect book for this, and I appreciate it so much. You being part of my lineup, it's made it badass. And thanks to Don Webb for let me know about it. And Don, of course, has co-hosted with me and been on about vampire magic. He's been on so much I've lost count. But I think this is your second or third time. But it's just an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And that's seekingthemysteries.com for everybody. Gothic Meditations at Midnight. It's like the greatest Halloween book ever to come out to me. It's great.
It's good.
It's
really
like
good.
watching a silent, cool-ass Nosferatu. But we appreciate it so much. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for having me. I really loved it.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
And I posted this link on your wall and everything, and I'll send you the archives as I get them and stuff too, and send them to you. But thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. You're listening to United Public Radio 10.7 FM New Orleans. We're going to get into the actors. Was it Gunnar Hansen and Kane Hodder next week with Michael Aliosa, the guys that play these horror legends. So that's going to be good. And I love Halloween. So that's right. A lot of stuff I got to catch up on. I'm watching right now, horror stuff. But everybody have a good weekend. Good night. Thanks, Jeffrey and Jeffrey.